Hello, everybody. Come on in. It's Friday. This is It's the Democracy Stupid. I'm Edwin Eisendrath. This is Judd Legum, who probably you don't need an introduction to. But let me just say this. I think the divide in America may not be exactly what people think it is. But one way to describe it is one side is shared facts and the pursuit of truth, and the other is shared lies and the pursuit of power. I mean, that is just what they're doing. And one of the great weapons that the side that cares about facts has is investigative journalism. You know, stuff that really believes that democracy isn't a spectator sport, and you have to strengthen it by the truth. And Judd is a practitioner of that art. He does it by himself, and he does stuff that some of the big newsrooms in the country go like, "Oh my gosh, really? How come we can't get that done?" So I'm really delighted to be joined by Judd, and I'm going to say it now, but also at the end. Popular Information is his site, and it's on Substack, and you should subscribe to it, and pay for it because journalism isn't free. It's really important, great work. Judd, thanks for joining me.
Well, thanks for having me, and thanks for that generous introduction.
Did I get it wrong?
No. I mean, I appreciate it. Maybe people should sign up and they can make their own judgments about the quality. But I'm trying my best to uncover some things to add some value each day. It comes out 4 days a week. Sometimes we are able to pull off a big investigation. Sometimes we're able to put things in, maybe a little bit of a deeper context, or uncover some archival quotes and videos and other things like that helps shine a light on it. But it's interesting and it's important. And at the time when you see, big newsrooms, at least a lot of them kind of getting smaller and smaller and maybe a little less ambitious, with some exceptions, of course. I think the ability of people like myself to do this work independently is important.
Yeah, journalism's changed. Big news. I used to run one. I was the CEO of the Chicago Sun-Times. I mean,
sure.
The big organizations are shrinking, and other organizations are just being co-opted. Yeah. So it's a dangerous time for sure. I want to talk about a couple of your pieces, if you don't mind. That people may have missed them and give you a chance to talk about them. Yeah. But I also want to zoom out. But I just want to start with this because it's such a great example. Your piece last week that just went through the illegality of Trump's post-SCOTUS tariffs, and I didn't think his new tariffs were going to be legal. But what you did was you talked about how journalism failed. And you just gave example after example of people just reporting what he said and reporting incorrectly about the legality of his plans.
Yeah, this kind of surprised me a bit too. because it was telegraphed for a while. This Supreme Court case was argued many months ago. Right. We knew the decision was coming down. I don't think people knew exactly what the decision would be, but I think people thought there's a possibility that these all get overturned because the case for the original tariffs was so weak, just on a strictly legal basis. Mm-hmm. And that's what the Supreme Court did, at least, the six justice majority. The alternatives have been talked about. And, one of them was this bill. It's a 1974 act called the Trade Act. And it is based on a finding that there's a difference that there's a balance of payments problem, which is interesting because Trump always talks about the trade deficit. I mean, that was his justification for the first one. And when he talked about, we're doing this new tariffs, it's the trade deficit. And a lot of outlets, I think that they did two things. Some outlets just flat out reported that this bill allowed you to implement tariffs based on a trade deficit,
which it doesn't,
which is totally false. And then even more pervasive was just kind of flatly asserting that he had the power to impose tariffs under this law. But actually, if you look at the law and if you pay attention to prominent economists who know about balance of payments, actually the United States doesn't have a balance of payments problem. There's a trade deficit, but counterbalancing that, there's all these money, trillions of dollars that are getting poured into investments. People love to buy stocks. People love to buy U.S. Treasury bonds. And the United States doesn't have a problem or a deficit at all on the balance of payments when you look at all the money flowing in and out.
Right.
And there's really no legal basis under this law to impose these tariffs. So it was disappointing, and we ticked through it in this piece, that you've got major publications, Axios, others with that are very prominent, regarded as pretty rigorous, who are getting it flatly wrong. But then other outlets, pretty much across the board, who are just saying, well, he has this power. Oh, but he can only do it for 150 days. Well, no, actually, if you look at the law, he can't do it at all. Now, what he's probably figuring, and he might be right about this, is by the time the challenges to these new tariffs, which I am assuming are coming, winds their way through the court, it may be longer than 150 days. And then the issue will be moot because he'll have some time to get, to do these investigations that are required to trigger some other authority. So that might be what's going on. But the idea that he'll get away with it is different than it being legal.
Right. That's right.
Yeah.
And so I love that you laid it out, and you showed us the reporting that was not fully vetted. I think is a nice way to put it. So I thought that was great. I really did. You also spent time this weekend. Accountability is on my mind. Like, how do we hold these people to account? And the legal system failed to hold them to account after January 6th. And Pam Bondi's not about to hold anybody to account in this round. So the only way we do it is through journalism. And you have done. That doesn't mean we won't eventually do it through the legal system, but to get there, we have to do it through journalism. You had some good pieces on Jared and his role in negotiating with Iran. Talk about that too.
Yeah, this is something that, if you look at what the media has paid attention to, and some of the stories that have garnered reams and just daily incessant coverage, and I think justified to some extent, it's been about, is there foreign influence in U.S. politics? I mean, this goes all the way back to, Clinton and Gore and the fundraisers with, Chinese nationals. But even more recently, you can look at Hillary Clinton and the Clinton Foundation, and, would these potential donations to the Clinton Foundation, now she's not even president yet, but would these donations to the Clinton Foundation, and I think these are legitimate questions, could that influence from foreign governments, could that influence a future hypothetical Hillary Clinton administration? This was viewed as something that is very important because we don't want to have foreign governments with undue influence on the government. Here with Jared Kushner, we have a situation where there is literally a person who, on an annual basis, is not involved with an organization that's taking in some donations for malaria nets, which was the situation with the Clinton Foundation. This is somebody who is putting tens of millions of dollars into his own pocket to, quote unquote, manage the money of the sovereign wealth funds of Saudi Arabia, of the UAE, and other foreign governments. In fact, that's all he's doing. 99% of the money that's in his fund is from foreign governments. And he is at the table, most recently dealing with the Iranian situation, which appears to be on the brink of perhaps another war, representing U.S. interests with Steve Witkoff, really one of two people representing U.S. interests. So simultaneously on the payroll, also negotiating with, being the United States representative, representing United States interests. All of the countries that he's taking money from have vested interests in what the outcome of this is. Especially
interests that are greater than our own. I mean, their economies are completely tied because they're in the same business, which oil. But B, it's their neighborhood, and the stability of that neighborhood is of great interest to them, far more than it really is for us. So they have a lot more at stake than Americans, and they're paying him. And by the way, there's also the Logan Act, which
and really that's why it's written into the Constitution that you cannot be a officer of the United States and be accepting money from foreign governments. That's why we have.
And Jared said as much. He said, "I will not be part of this administration because I'm taking all this foreign money." And sure enough, here's where we are.
Exactly. And they're trying to advance this fiction that he is not a member of the administration. He's some sort of volunteer, but really each day, this was always kind of laughable, but each day, I mean, he is the central person on every critical foreign policy issue, which, he really had no experience when he went into this role in the first Trump administration. I guess now he's been at it so long for Trump, you can say he had experience. So Trump can put in who he wants, but he has put in Jared Kushner. And therefore, Jared Kushner should comply with the law. What's been interesting from the media coverage of this is that we've kind of mentioned it, but now that he just keeps on being at the table, whether it's in Moscow, whether it's in Geneva, whether it's dealing with Ukraine, Gaza, now Iran, it's just sort of, it's not discussed.
Yeah, this goes back to that accountability question. When it was Hillary, I guess it's still Hillary and Bill there, this week. Whether it was Barack, whether it was Joe, if there's a hint of something they need to be held accountable for, it's screamed on the front pages and nothing else breaks through. Nothing else breaks through. So Hunter Biden's laptop got more headlines and more press than some of the economic successes of the Biden administration, right? In Trump's case, the corruption, which is rampant, is like background noise as far as the press is concerned. And that I don't understand that, and I find it hard to hold them accountable in that kind of a world.
I mean, I think the issue is, and this is, I think, in service, which is in some ways laudable, in service of trying to be even-handed. It's almost as if there is a 1-gallon bucket that is suitable for, on each side, on the Democrats, the Republicans, that you can fill up with stories about corruption and conflicts of interest. And you have to fill the bucket completely. So on the Trump side, they'll fill it up, but anything that goes beyond that gallon just spills over the side. And on the Democratic side, obviously there's been some scandals over the years, but if there's not, they will just keep filling the bucket with whatever they have until it gets to that gallon line. And it creates an equivalency between these two things when they're not equivalent. I mean, it would be as if Joe Biden sent Hunter Biden as the representative of the United States to every critical foreign policy issue, which he did not do.
No.
And also, I think of Hunter Biden's his personal profiteering from foreign governments was paled in comparison to what Kushner is doing. He wasn't getting as much money, but yes. But I think actually the Hunter Biden story got a lot more coverage because it was one of the things that they had some traction on, and so it continued to get replayed, recast, rehashed to provide some balance.
Well, let's talk about this idea of traction. I hope that you and I and others who are watching this, that we aren't a closed loop talking to ourselves all the time. And I had this conversation with my very smart bride this morning about like what breaks through. How much of the journalism that you are providing is responsible for Trump's falling poll numbers, for example. Is it breaking through? do you think, I mean, I hope it is, or is it just that people are looking at their lives and going, I'm sorry, my life isn't better, and this guy promised it would be? Like, how do we know?
I think it's always a combination of all
Yep.
of those things. And one of the things that I think can be frustrating in a way is that you never really know what, especially if you're looking at the overall political context. You can know in some specific
Mm-hmm.
stories where you do a story and it might have an impact about a specific policy or specific company.
Sure.
But as far as sort of the overall political environment, you don't really know. But I think that a lot of it has to do with people's attitudes, but people's attitudes are informed of, based on all the information that they know. And the information that they know is coming from different sources. So you have the people who might read what you're writing directly, and that's why, I want to build up my audience. I want to get as many subscribers as I can, because that's part of my sort of editorial mission. But there is value in my mind about creating a group of people who is as informed as possible about what's going on.
Yeah.
Because they talk to other people. And especially if you look on the margins, if you look at the people who are the swing voters, the people who are shifting from one group to another, my understanding and sort of intuition is that those are people who are consuming a lot of news indirectly, meaning they might be going out to the primary source, but they may be discussing it with a friend or with a relative or someone else. And then that is how perception slowly is changed. Now there's broader economic and other factors that maybe swamp all of this, but it all contributes to the direction that you're
I think so too. I mean, it's a big country. It's very hard to get through, particularly when there's this massive propaganda machine that makes it harder. Well,
yeah, and I think one of the things, and I've talked about that a lot, over the last couple of years in the newsletter, is the consolidation. When we saw it again, last night as I was going to sleep, where you learned that I guess Paramount Sundance or Paramount Sky something, which was what it's called now, that owns CBS, is now going to seemingly get Warner Brothers, which owns CNN, because Netflix dropped out. And it does seem like the administration was pushing this. Actually, Jared Kushner was part of that deal.
That's right. And foreign money is in the deal.
Foreign money is in the deal. Kushner was part of it. He formally dropped out, which really doesn't mean much because he didn't have any money anyway, other than the connections with these foreign governments.
Right. That's right.
And he was just included, I think, to send a signal that this would have a easier chance as a regulatory matter of getting approved. But then people, I think, thought it was maybe not an elegant enough signal. It was a little bit too heavy-handed. He dropped back to give it more of an appearance of neutrality. But clearly, we know if he's making calls, if he's putting his thumb and using the connections he has, we know which side he's on. It's not the Netflix side.
Yeah, I mean, it's utterly corrupt. We have a foreign policy that's really the personal policy of the Trump family. And now we have a regulatory policy that is, the personal policy of the Trump family, none of which is how this is supposed to work. I heard you say something about Trump's playbook in Minnesota. That when things went bad, his habit is, I didn't see that. I don't know what you're talking about. Then to accuse the opposition of like every evil in the book, and then to double down on what he was doing in the first place. And I heard you say that, and then I put myself through watching the State of the Union, and I saw exactly the same thing. All those Epstein victims are in front of him. I don't even see you. You're invisible. What? Never heard of it. Don't know what you're talking about, but it was all attack his adversaries. And then he doubled down on every one of these unpopular MAGA policies. What's your sense? I mean, you have besides just the stories that you cover, you have a good sense of the country. What's your sense of how of whether that act is wearing a little thin with Americans.
Yeah, I think he is running into more resistance this term than he did even in his first term. I think initially the idea was, the opposition is kind of, they're despondent. They're going to just pack up this time. I don't think that that's occurred. I think he's losing his support on some of the key issues that were a ballast for him. One of the ways in which he was able to secure victory a second time is to make inroads in sort of new communities like the Latino community, African American community, others. I think that's really been completely destroyed through his policies. But and part of the reason why is there's only one strategy, which is escalation, and there is a mentality of how do you be successful? One of the things that a lot of people or maybe is less well known is that one of Trump's closest friends and longtime associates is Vince McMahon of the WWE and professional wrestling. And they're very close. I mean, Trump is a member of the WWE Hall of Fame. He used to appear a lot of times, but the communications style, the approach to how do you capture an audience, how do you get them to pay attention to you and what you are saying and doing is the same in that you always have to top the next event. When you're on WrestleMania 25, it has to be bigger and more outrageous and more of a spectacle than WrestleMania 24. And that's the type of strategy that Trump pursues. If the first attempt isn't working out, he tries to come up with something that's even wilder. And eventually you start to run up against limits, but there's never a retreat. We saw that with the tariffs.
Well, wait, I'm not sure, Judd. I completely agree. I think he runs into a limit and he changes the narrative. I'm thinking about the first term when he went to the UN to say about North Korea and their nuclear program that we are going to rain holy terror on North Korea. And the whole world thought we were threatening nuclear war with North Korea. And then he went to North Korea and the dear leader showed him that he already had his nuclear weapons. And Trump then legitimized them all by saying, oh, we're best friends. And look at these love letters he sent me. So he could escalate until he finds that somebody's going to push him back. And then suddenly, I don't know, like the Zoran Mamdani thing completely confuses me. He called him a communist at the communist mayor of New York 2 days ago or 3 days ago on his State of the Union. And this week he was like, they met in the Oval Office and shared a laugh and he's going to help them build housing. I guess I think I agree with you. He escalates and escalates and escalates, but he leaves himself this weird escape hatch to flip the narrative when he doesn't work.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's if a certain narrative's not working, you just switch to a new narrative, but you make sure that is a bigger, thing. And I think, so for instance, and I think that's what he's doing right now with the economy, where it seems like if you're looking at the public opinion polling and just kind of the general mood of the country, that's what people are concerned about because wages are not keeping pace with costs, particularly housing costs and other things that make up a big chunk of regular, sort of working America.
Yep.
But he doesn't really have a compelling narrative on that other than to just say things are good. So the focus is on other things. We're on foreign policy. We're on tariffs. We're on all sort. He's having a meeting at the White House about college sports, and he's going to fix college sports, and he's renaming the Kennedy Center. It's just more and more and more and more, and that's just what the world is going to be like for at least a few more years.
I think madness, because that's not what people want. They have some very specific things they want, and they've told them, please make life better for me and my family. Please make sure we can afford to live the kind of life we thought we could live in America, and do the things that we want to do together, and have the kind of future that we want to have. And he's busy talking about stuff that people are like, what? Like, okay. What do you think of, what would you say your most impactful piece of work has been in this year? And how do you think about that?
It's more difficult in this context to have an impact, especially on the national level, because no matter what the facts are, it doesn't change. But I think if I have to look back at the last year and look at some of the stories I've done, I think the one that what I would say had the biggest impact as far as people's understanding, at least, of the transactional nature of this presidency was a piece that I wrote about these very specialized bandages that have become a huge cost under Medicaid and Medicare, actually, more specifically. People need these type of bandages for all sorts of reasons, but they're very expensive. They can range from $50 for a square inch to thousands of dollars for a square inch. And there was a rule that was started under the Biden administration, not finalized, that said, hey, we're now spending more on these bandages than we are on ambulances. I mean, this has become a huge cost for Medicare. So there's some good science that says these are necessary, but here are the ones that actually are proven efficacious and are not thousands of dollars. They're more like $100. And so we're going to stop paying for these extremely expensive bandages. This was bad news for a company called Extremity Care, which was selling some of the most expensive bandages. And they were involved with this kind of kickback scheme where they were incentivizing doctors to use the expensive ones. Cost billions of dollars in wasted expenditures under Medicare, which, as we know, is a big cost center for the federal government. It's under a lot of pressure, legislatively and otherwise. So this was scheduled to come into effect. First, it was delayed based on the fact that the Trump administration just delayed all the Biden rules for a couple of months when they got in. But it was scheduled to go into effect in April. And what I reported, we only learned this in July, right after the FEC put their report out, or the reports were filed, was that right before, a few days before that was scheduled to go into effect, Extremity Care donated, I believe, $5 million to the Trump super PAC. And then the rule was delayed again. And for all of 2025, Extremity Care, for that $5 million, and they subsequently donated money to the ballroom, was allowed to continue to get reimbursement from Medicare. The prices and the expenditures on these bandages going up and up. Later, there's a new rule, maybe slightly better than the status quo, but it continues to allow Extremity Care to charge way more than necessary for these bandages. And I think that kind of reporting, which is based on the documents, and I try to pay attention when these FEC filings come out. I think it's a clear example of the transactional nature. It got picked up by a lot of other outlets, including the New York Times, and that, I think, is a microcosm of what we are dealing with, which is that this administration is extremely transactional, and these sort of very important policy decisions that infect a lot of people can be purchased for a relatively low amount of money.
Apparently, NVIDIA chips to power Chinese AI, purchased by Jared, really, I guess, because it was a deal with the Qataris that got him to China. So, yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
it's all like, if you scratch his back, it doesn't matter what it does to the American people. You had a story, could have been yesterday, I read it, about the missing Epstein files, which I also thought was timely and important. And I think this is breaking through as well. So talk about that.
Yeah, I think the Epstein files have broken through because it crosses across party lines. He really played into it just while he was running, saying this was going to be a big thing, that he was going to release these
more than we did. And I think in this case, now that I'm sorry to interrupt, Judd, but now that people like me are getting to see the scope of this, of the world that Epstein created and the damage that he did to these young women, but also the corrupt use of these relationships, it's much bigger and it's much more important than people like me, and certainly than I realized for a long time when I heard folks on the right complain about it. It turns out they were right.
Yeah. And I think they may have been right for the wrong reasons. One of the reasons why they were so interested in it was because it was sort of tied into the QAnon conspiracy, which is that Trump was this white knight and he was going to take out the pedophiles. And it was by releasing the Epstein files was part of this. Anyone who supports Trump has a hard time distancing himself from, no matter how out there they are. So he endorsed this, got on board with the Epstein files. Even at the beginning of the administration, you saw them. They invited, some of these online influencers and,
Dan Bongino
gave them binders that said, Epstein files part 1.
Oh, you're thinking about something else. Yeah.
But this, what we learned this week, and I think it's important just to caveat, is we don't know what's true and what's not. These are files. There's a lot of allegations in them. We obviously know that horrible crimes were committed. That doesn't mean necessarily every single document is the gospel truth. But what we do know is that
the documents you're talking about are what notes about what people said when they were interviewed, right?
Correct.
And so the documents are real. They say what they say. Whether that is indicative of a crime you could convict somebody for is a different question.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But they're important. And that's why there was this law that people wanted these released, because we wanted to know what was going on. And obviously there's been lots of people who have had consequences from this, who have had to step down or gotten fired, or, whether it's Larry Summers at Harvard, there's, people getting arrested, previous members of the royal family getting arrested in the UK. So, but anyway, these documents, they said, this was eventually in January, they said, okay, well, we've now released everything. They released 3 million more files. There was another independent reporter who publishes on Substack, Roger Sullenberg, who very smartly, by comparing what they called the Bates numbers, the markings on these documents that were placed on the documents during Maxwell's trial, his sort of right-hand woman, that there were 3 interviews with a woman that have not been disclosed. And in the law, it says you can't not disclose something because it's going to embarrass someone politically. It's very clear. There's very limited exceptions, and most of it is around protecting victims of what can't be disclosed. And these interviews, we know from other documents that kind of briefly describe who this woman was a woman who, when she was a minor, around, I think, 13 to 15 years old, alleges that she was sexually assaulted by Trump and Epstein, but also Trump. And that she, and essentially, for whatever, we don't know why, but for whatever reason, the FBI found it necessary to interview her 4 times. We got the one interview where she talks about in detail about her allegations against Epstein, we're missing these 3 where she discusses Trump. And there's really been no specific explanation as to why these are missing. And one of the things that I do in my piece is talk about all of the times that the Trump administration has insisted that everything has been disclosed and that nothing has been done to protect Trump, and that these files completely exonerate Trump. And I think the existence of these interviews, which isn't to say that what the interviews are saying, whatever's in the interviews definitely 100% happened, but the existence of the interviews and the fact that they've been withheld shows, completely undermines that narrative, because you can't be exonerated if the most serious charges that exist against you in the files have been withheld for no articulated reason.
For anybody, certainly in the upper Midwest watching this, but many others will know this, the particular victim in this case was a young woman who was groomed at the camp in Interlochen, Michigan, an arts camp that's an absolutely beautiful place that kids go there with enormous talent and a lot of innocence and learn to be really remarkable artists. And that Epstein apparently bought a cabin right near those grounds and was trying to groom those people. It's heartbreaking in every possible way. Heartbreaking. Oh, Judd, if you have a hope for the journalism consumption habits of America between now and, let's say, November, what is that?
Well, I think it's a really important time as a news consumer, and I'm a big news consumer myself. So I actually have to, as somebody who writes news, I've got to do this myself. And you've got to think about, where you're getting your sources from. And so I think what we've seen is a lot of the places that you previously could rely on for really robust coverage, whether that's the Washington Post, whether that's CNN, whether that's the Los Angeles Times. Not to say that there aren't some great reporters there, but overall, if you look at what these publications were 5 years ago, 10 years ago, and you look at what there are now, I don't think there's something that you want to be as reliant on. And so I think it's important to create a mix of larger sources, places because there's some stories that you can only do with a dozen reporters or 24 reporters. So you want to have those sources, but I think you also want to find independent sources that you can trust and create a sort of robust mix so that you can stay informed. Unfortunately, there is no such thing anymore as the paper of record, or the place that you can just, it used to be, you might have been able to stay relatively well informed just by reading whatever the local paper was that was serving your area, especially if you lived in a,
big city,
a large or to medium-sized city. I don't think that's the case. I think you've got to broaden your wings, bring in independent sources. Don't only rely on independent sources. I think that's equally as dangerous because you want to get the context. You're not going to learn about everything that I think people should know about by just reading my newsletter. I'm trying to fill in the gaps of what I see in the coverage. And so that's my hope, is that people, that people really embrace that. And I will say that as depressing as what a lot's happened in journalism, it wasn't that great before this happened either, meaning that not so long ago, there was more of a journalistic consensus about how we should cover things. And there was a much more limited number of people who were really even involved in the conversation. And that kind of consensus, for instance, helped drive us into the Iraq War. Because no matter what you were reading,
I agree with you.
Pretty much every outlet was either editorializing in favor of the war or producing very credulous coverage about the claims that were being made. So that wasn't a great system either.
I agree with you, Judd.
What we have now is not great because we're consolidating, wealthy. But I think there is a better future where you have a more diverse group of voices, people can be informed and look at things more critically.
Yeah, it's very important. Anybody who thinks, oh, I don't know, Walter Cronkite was the golden age of news. Walter Cronkite was terrific at his job, but anybody who was watching the news back then had no idea what life was like in Black America. It was just never told, not by anybody. You know, I mean, it was told in the Black community for sure, but not on any major media for anybody. So these huge gaps in our national narrative, I might add, gaps that this administration wants to restore fully. They want people to be invisible again that they don't like. And Americans aren't going to be invisible, and Americans aren't going to ignore the facts. And Judd, they're not going to ignore your writing, which is part of why we aren't going back there. We're out of time, but I want to thank you. And just before we go, tell everybody how to get your stuff.
Yeah, you can go right to popular.info is the website. You can find me on Substack. It'll come out 4 days a week, Monday through Thursday. You'll be hearing from us.
Yeah. All right, everybody. Thank you for joining me. You can find my stuff at It's the Democracy Stupid, and of course, here on Lincoln Square. So thank you for spending the time with us, and leave a note when you see this so we know what you thought. Take care.